Okay, I think we're at time. Everyone sit down, I'll start. Let's go. Hello all, I'm Michael LaMontagne. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I've had that status for about 8 years. It's nice to actually see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in two plus years, so it's great to kind of be in front of people again. My day-to-day is really being a consultant that works with organizations and partners to further them along in their team's journey. And so that could be talking about phone system, it could be devices, governance, adoption, extensibility, or even now Microsoft Viva. So really kind of all areas, but today we're going to be looking at phone system. I have a lot of demos. After the keynote, I noticed that the Wi-Fi was a problem, so I ran up to my hotel room and recorded a couple of them, so we'll see if they work out. But I have a lot of content. So there probably won't be any time for questions, but feel free at any time after or during this event, reach out to me, or you can hit me up on Twitter, real-time UC. Okay, so this session really is me dusting off my to-blog list. It's been collecting a lot of dust. I haven't been blogging so much, but these are all the tips and tricks that have come along the way as I've been doing a lot of voice deployments. So a shameless plug, I'm a member of the O365.com or O365A.com podcast group. We post every 2 weeks a video just talking about what's going on within the Microsoft 365 stack, mostly Teams and Viva. There is stickers. I'm not sure if people still put stickers on their laptops over near the water and the cups, so feel free to grab one of those stickers. We are actually posting our 100th episode next week. Okay. So the agenda for today, and maybe this is a counterbalance to Jamie's session. So the future is IT dev. We'll talk about IT Pro versus IT Dev in my personal opinion. We'll go over some call queue tricks. We'll go over SelfHelp Diagnostics. Go over the art of Excel. I know there's some comments of stop using Excel, but I wanted to show some of the features that actually came out last year that have helped spreadsheet migrations. Go over phone system PowerShell tips and Cloud Shell. So the reason why I like to think of IT Dev instead of IT Pro is, 4 years ago or so, where we were thinking of IT Pro, a lot has changed. And so if you think of things like, hey, Microsoft's documentation, well, that's Docs is now on GitHub. It's crowdsourced, open source. Well, not fully, but we can go in there and post edits. I know Torrin was talking about the image for LMO has the wrong IPs. Well, he can submit a poll and provide the new diagram, and it can get approved and replaced. So the big thing here is, as a former IT pro, going to GitHub and monitoring the docs pages is my most reliable place to find out what's happening in the kind of the general ring of tenants and what features are rolling out. So I have access to a lot of NDA information and TAP programs, which is a technology adoption program. So when I see it in the docs pages, I know I can start to talk about it in the public. So some of the items that have kind of come up, routing calls to unassigned numbers. This is a big one, because this is, some of the scenarios that may change for your enterprise deployments. So instead of creating an auto tenant or a call queue that's forwarding a second number to an individual, maybe they had a private line, maybe they had a toll-free number, we can actually use these unassigned number ranges and specify that number to go to an alternative person, or we can play an audio file. Currently with that, the audio file, after it plays, it doesn't hang up the call. Hopefully that gets addressed, because right now it's in public preview. But we can also take blocks of our numbers and send it to an auto tenant or a call queue. So this is perfect in the scenario for calling plans, Operator Connect, and direct routing. So great feature that has just come out in private preview. There's been enhancements around call park, as well as there's a new commandlet that's going to be for number assignment. So this CS phone number assignment commandlet for set and remove. This is going to allow you to set user numbers as well as those resource account numbers across Operator Connect, direct routing, and calling plans. Notice there's not a get command, so we're still going to have to use the old get commands for calling plans to get calling plans and direct routing numbers. So just keep that in mind. Custom music on hold. Jamie was talking about maybe policies coming in the admin center for that, and then the PowerShell releases. So if we go in to So we think about this. So if we go to the docs pages, go right down to the bottom, hit this page and in GitHub, we can now go and see the repository for all the Microsoft documentation for Skype for Business and Teams, and we could follow and watch that repository. Now keep in mind, it's going to be starting to send you emails, and you're going to get all the edits, all the typos, all the questions. Make sure you have Outlook rules, put it in somewhere, find a way to parse it. But this is the best place to know what is new, what is changing, what commandlets are having new parameters. So I highly recommend doing this. The other reason I kind of go to the IT dev term is REST APIs. So we know Microsoft Graph is the API that really underpins all the Microsoft 365 workloads. Well, when we think about dealing with these APIs, we need to think about service principals. We need to think about permissions, application, delegated. We need to think about API syntax. We have to think about dealing with the JSON input and output, and then tokens. So, most of my projects these days are using an API in some way, and it may not always be the Graph API. An example of that was I had a customer that was rolling out a couple hundred emergency locations across across North America, and I got a spreadsheet dump of from their AD or whatever their program was, their HR system, of all these addresses. I'm like, well, I need to validate these addresses before I even attempt to try and create these addresses in the event center. So I went and found a trial API, and I set up for a demo, and I just basically took that CSV file, threw it into a simple PowerShell loop, authenticated to this API, and then just hit the API with all my addresses. And then out came the coordinates or the geocodes, as well as the postal codes. And then I just compared the postal code against the postal code that I got from their export, just to see if there was some garbage in, garbage out going on. So, and now we'll see if the demo gods are on my side. But a simple example, I'm just going to grab the first line in the file, hit play, and you can see pretty quickly I got a return result of the postal code and the geocodes. Now I can use the new online address or the emergency address commandlets to create those addresses online. There is an issue with the 260 PowerShell module that I get access denied at this point. That's already been reported. But just thinking about doing these phone systems at scale, you're not going to go into the admin center until there's the ability to do the bulk import of emergency addresses. You're going to have to create these and get these validated. Okay. Another big reason why I want to kind of harp on that IT dev world is API changes. So something that changes in Azure Active Directory identity, this was posted on their blog, impacts us as the IT pro. So now when we use MSO Align, although you shouldn't be using that anymore, Azure AD, if you're using these PowerShell modules to interact with licensing, next year this is not going to work anymore. The API to actually deal with licensing is going away for that. And you have to, and the recommendation is actually to use the Microsoft Graph PowerShell. So this is a new PowerShell module, which means your scripts have to be rewritten, and you need to understand how that module works. I find it interesting that Microsoft isn't releasing a new version of the Azure AD PowerShell module, but redirecting those requests now to this new module. The thing with this new module is it's a very little bit of code. So if you think about it, they're basically taking the Graph API and they're throwing it through a code generator, putting a little bit of PowerShell over it to wrap it, and then packaging it out. So it is written based on the Graph API spec. So it's using Swagger or Open API or whatever the spec is put in, and generating these PowerShell commands. So this really removes PowerShell as being our traditional client app that we can deal with things like what-if statements and pipelines and nice error handling. So hopefully the code generation gets improved, but right now we do have to understand the underlying API. We have to interact with this API a lot more than we had to when it was in a PowerShell module. So now we have to think about paging of data, tokens. We need to think about throttling. We need to think about handling of the error messages. So this, I hope the Teams product group is not going to go the same way with the Teams PowerShell module, unless there's improvements on the Graph module today for what we use as the IT pro. So that's one concern I have around this module. And if we go into it, I'll show you an example of this. So I've already connected into it. And so I'm just going to grab the Graph module And we'll just make this a little bit bigger. So you can see there is a hierarchy. So it is pulling through the API. So you have Microsoft, we have Microsoft.graph, we have Microsoft.graph.user, and then we're going to have our commandlets under that. So if we look at some of the syntax that we think of from the IT Pro, we can look at, what are the commands. Hey, we have, MG user password. We have, MG user manager. So if we take that example and we do our connect, similar to Teams, we'll connect to, MG graph. We'll grab a user. Simple, what we would expect. We get a result. Then we say, okay, we want to look at this user's manager. Maybe we're going to build a script that's going to replace all the managers. Well, we don't have a value. This graph commandlet is optimized, but it doesn't bring us all the attributes we need. So let's then expand the property and bring in that manager attribute. So great, we got a result. But now we're dealing with object IDs and GUIDs, not the traditional, hey, here's our UPN. So now we have to think of, okay, we get a result back. Now we have to do another command to make it friendly for our next script or our spreadsheets. Another example, let's just grab the user manager right off the commandlet. So we have a different commandlet, and these commandlets are becoming more action-based commandlets versus task-based. So set user manager, set user password, instead of set user and set their manager and their password all on one line. So we have to think of breaking up our scripts. So let's just go, okay, we had that manager ID. We're going to go then do another get, and then we get some friendly information. Well, let's go and pipe that. Let's say, hey, we want to grab our user and then find out who their manager is. Maybe we have a script and we're going to do our traditional PowerShell of looping. Well, the pipeline has stopped on user manager. Input null on get MG user. Well, I'm providing this. So now we have to think, okay, we're not the traditional error messages that we had before. We need to now interpret what the API is seeing and how to interact with this. So this is why I see IT Pro really moving to IT Dev in this world where we're dealing with PowerShell and interacting with these APIs. We do need to understand the syntax for this and work with these. Okay, let's make sure. Another call out, and this is more on the pretty powerful side, is Microsoft 365 DSC. Highly recommend you checking this out. This is basically built on PowerShell DSC. So PowerShell DSC is desired state configuration. And this is really taking your configuration as code for Microsoft 365. So this will dump all your policy settings. This will dump your user settings. You can specify if it's Azure AD, if it's Exchange, if it's SharePoint. Basically, here's your document of how your tenant is configured. You can then put this in Azure Runbooks. You can put this in Azure DevOps. You can get email alerts when someone's making changes to policies, when new settings get turned on and you need to make decisions. Or you can have that gold standard if you're managing multiple tenants and apply that policy definition for whatever complexity or whatever aspect of your tenant to all your other tenants. So this is pretty powerful. It is based on Microsoft Graph, and it is on that Microsoft DSC. Okay, so let's talk about Graph Explorer. So if we're going to interact with this, and this is one of the demos I recorded quickly upstairs, so it's not going to be the most pretty or elegant demo. But basically, if you're going to interact with these APIs, there is a web browser, web app that we can use called Graph Explorer. And this allows us to interact with these APIs. So I've signed into this account, and we'll see if this turns on. I've signed into this account with Megan. And then what we're going to do is we're going to authorize this application. So I've gone into Azure AD. This application has been authorized in my tenant for this specific user. It has specific permissions or properties that it's allowed to execute. And then I can go into the Graph Explorer again and start running some commands. So I'm going to look for presence. And the reason why I'm doing this is I had a customer that rolled out a whole bunch of common area phones, and they were having an issue with the refresh token expiring. So all these phones looked like they were working, but they weren't actually signed in or functional. So what they did was they used the Graph API to call to presence. They looped through all their common area accounts to see which ones were offline, and then they dispatched their technician to go and deal with those offline phones. So you can see I'm trying to call this API. It's saying, hey, we're forbidden. So we need to think, again, like a developer, we need specific permissions. The Graph Explorer does have the ability to single click and enable that. That's not going to be as easy for your own app. But then if we go into a tenant that does have this access, hey, we're going to interact with this API. This presence one happens to be in the beta endpoint. And look, I got some results, but presence unknown. I passed it the UPN. Again, we need to think about object IDs, and we need to change the way we're interacting with these programmatically APIs. So I changed that to the object ID. I got offline. This user wasn't in my tenant, but again, federation, open federation, I was able to pull that presence. So Graph Explorer is a powerhouse in trying to interact with these APIs. That also lets you know what is the return JSON that you would get to parse and interact with that data. Just a follow-up on that, the customer that was using that presence API to track down their common area phones, they actually did something pretty interesting. They had a whole bunch of YubiKeys that were not in use, and they actually programmed the default password with their complex common area phone password, and then they walked up to the phones and plugged it into the USB, and it detected it. And so they would just have the technician type in the UPN, hit the YubiKey, put the password in, and walk off to the next one. So they didn't have to type in the password every time they're interacting with the screen or bring a keyboard around. So just some tips there. Okay, if we look at calling plan, so a little shift of gears, we're going to look at call queues. So the first one is going to be for Jamie, since he's in attendance. One of my complaints with interacting with values in the admin center is if you highlight it and let go, it highlights the row. So you must highlight it, use your keyboard key, Control-C it, and then you can use the phone number in another field. So just if you're ever fighting with trying to get the data, don't fire up the dev tools and try and copy it out to the HTML or whatever like that. You can copy it, you just have to not let go of the mouse. Okay. So if we are looking at collaborative call queues, so these are pretty powerful enhancements to normal call queues. These allow you to tie a queue to a channel. The interesting thing is if you tie the queue to a channel and then you reference that team or that Microsoft 365 group as the destination for voicemail within that call queue, you'll see all the voicemail messages within the calling app in Teams. So if we look in Teams, and of course this was loading since my internet timeout. Let's see if it goes back. There you go. So you can see all those voicemail messages are pulled out from the actual team. So that we have a call flow that basically says if no one answers the call, send it to voicemail. The voicemail is going to the Microsoft 365 group. Since in that call queue that group is referenced, it then is able to pull those voicemail messages right into the calling app within the collaborative queue. Now, you can't delete these messages. Hopefully that changes in the future, but you're able to interact with those without having to go to Outlook or anything like that. Now, the scenario that came up with one of my customers was, okay, we have a call queue, and then we're going to have an escalation call queue. So that call queue doesn't get answered. We're going to go to another call queue, and if that call queue doesn't get answered, we want to send the voicemail back to the original team. Well, the minute you don't reference that group in the call queue, the collaborative calling drops the ability to access the voicemail messages. So the customer came up with a clever way of doing this, or a workaround. They basically went back in and said, okay, if we have someone waiting on the call for 5 minutes, we're going to route it to the escalation queue. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just set an unreasonably large number on the overflow so that we still leave the connection to the team as the voicemail destination. So if we just say this, we'll say, so if we leave that connection still there, but we're going to now redirect And we're going to say, we're going to go to a voice app, and we're going to go CC2. Now that we've done this, because we still have a reference to that team within this original call queue, the collaborative call queue, the voicemail messages are back in Teams. Okay. Another great feature in collaborative call queues is overriding the outbound caller ID and giving the users a list that they can pick from. So this can be auto attendants or call queues. So it doesn't have to just be call queue numbers. It can be direct routing, calling plans, operator connect. And this just gives the user that little drop down. If we just type in some numbers, we have that drop down. Make sure you pick friendly names, but then you have the ability to override that outbound caller ID. Now keep in mind this is only available in the calling app within the channel and not the calls app within your app rail. So you will not see the little drop down to use. Okay. A couple other nuances to kind of work around is that in the greetings, unlike auto attendants, we can't do text to speech. So we do have to record audio files. So keep this, there's a theme here. So we have to record audio files here. If we're going to voicemail and we select an audio file, that's perfectly fine. If we do text to speech at this point, what happens is we get the text-to-speech message and a system message. So if we take a look at that. Okay. I'm not sure if this is going to sound
Lines are busy. Please leave a message and we'll respond ASAP. Please leave a message after the tone. When you have finished, please hang up.
So now you have to think about your text-to-speech because you have two greetings that are coming there. But if you upload an audio file,
all our lines are busy. Please leave a message, and we'll respond ASAP.
There is no system greeting. So if we're thinking about those scenarios that, hey, we have a lot of these to do, and we're doing a lot of text-to-speech because we don't want to track down someone to record, well, we want to keep the consistency with our auto attendants and our call queues. Well, you can use the Azure service. You can use the Azure Cognitive Service for text-to-speech because it's the same voice engine. And what you can do is just create a simple function and just pass it a file name and pass it to whatever your text is. And then you can generate audio files within seconds. So if we do a simple one here, it's say 352, so no smoke and mirrors. And we'll grab the little folder just to show how quick this is. And if we run that, pending the internet and the demo gods, we can see that we have our audio file. So now you can pump out hundreds of files.
This is a test 352.
You can pump out hundreds of files within seconds, and it's just a little bit of Azure Azure services. You can also change the voice, of course. So if we wanted to change from Arya to say Guy, run that again.
Hello, comms V next. This is a test 352.
So if you're doing these at scale, you can just simply take a spreadsheet, grab your audio file, your name, pipe it through that function, and you can create these at mass. You can even add pauses that are longer than like a comma and space, all be interacting with the API. And Jens was the one that kind of flagged this. He was saying that I want to make a longer pause than what I can. And I was like, oh, I've been doing this. I wonder how you can actually add a pause. And I had to interact with the XML a little bit more, but all documented, again, kind of going to the IT dev. Okay. So when we think about some of the handling of calls in call queues, one scenario is if you have your call overflow as 0, as well as your call timeout is 0, the overflow will take precedence. If your overflow is, say, 200, and then you set your call timeout to, say, 0 seconds, there's an interesting scenario. Maybe you're just redirecting to an external phone number, an old PBX system that you haven't migrated yet. If you redirect through the call out timeout, even with a 0, you get an instance of music on hold. So if we do this, timeout. Did you hear that little beep of sound? So you get one little token of music on hold. But if you do it through overflow, so you put 0 on your overflow, you get no music on hold. So if you have a scenario
All our
where
lines are busy.
if you have a scenario where you want to redirect to an external number, but you want that presence that you're never putting someone on hold, you're redirecting to the reception line or something like that, you want to use the overflow versus the timeout. And so you could just put a 0 on this overflow and it'll trigger it first. And again, if they both hit at the same time, overflow is going to be the one that takes precedence. Okay. SelfHelp Diagnostics. I hope everyone has seen these tools. These are built into the admin center. The great thing with the Microsoft Docs page is that, and I think I have the wrong browser. The Docs pages have documented all the self-help tests that you can do for teams. So things like, hey, the dial pad is missing. Can't do federation. I don't know where my recording is. You can actually shortcut right from the Docs page into the admin center and run that specific test. So if we say we want a one-to-one call recording is not working. And let's see. So we click on that short link. It's going to go to the Teams admin center. Let me grab a username. And this will actually give you the input for this test. So we populate it. It's going to run its test. It's actually going to check the business voice directory, the back-end system that we don't really have direct access to. And if there's an out-of-sync option, or out-of-sync scenario, you actually have the ability to trigger a sync for the business voice directory. So this is something we can't do through PowerShell or through the API. This will tell you why there is an issue. Maybe it's not licensed, maybe the policy is incorrect, maybe the user is disabled. So great set of tests. These tests are one-offs. So you can't say, hey, I'm moving a site over. I just want to make sure everyone has the dial pad on day one. Let's loop all their users through this. I haven't figured out a way to call the API directly, but these are some great tests to say, a user's reporting that they don't have the dial pad. Instead of them sending in the client logs, let's just do a first quick check to see if everything is okay. And I've done deployments where, from a PowerShell perspective, enterprise voice is enabled, the phone number is enabled, the routing policies are, licensing, just something on the back end didn't sync. Maybe we were doing, a peak period or something like that. Do a simple disable, re-enable, and then you can see the results in here. So this was one of the first tools that I've been able to actually see the scenario, even when all the other tools are telling me that everything should be fine. This is just that example. So you could say, hey, we have the business voice directory that is out of sync. Let's check that box, acknowledge it, run the sync. It'll tell you, hey, come back in 45 minutes and check again. I was doing this with some auto attendants where the numbers weren't matching. I was calling the numbers, it wasn't answering. I did this test. There's a test for auto attendants. It basically says, hey, the data in our business voice directory is not the same. Let's sync it, and then we're off to the races. Shifting gears again, art of Excel. I heard a comment earlier. Someone was saying, I want my customers to get out of Excel. For me, as a consultant, and a lot of these things are me coming into a project and helping them on their journey. I'm not on the operations side. I'm trying to get in there with the lowest burden to get the projects done, hit all the deliverables, and make the customer happy. So Excel is that low-hanging fruit. We have some powerful functions in there to really make it simple to do onboarding. Back in the day, I loved creating PowerShell scripts that were complex, hundreds of lines. Put it in like TechNet and stuff like that. Now it's GitHub, so you want to put your scripts in GitHub and have the community co-author on that. But the benefit is this: is I could just create simple commands, one-liners. Auto-generate the commandlet, pick some variables, copy a whole bunch of lines, hundreds, thousands of lines, throw it in an authenticated window, off to the races and enable. I don't have to worry about error checking. I may not have access to the customer's tenant. I have the ability to test their specific scenario. What is the lowest burden? So some of the features that came out in Excel, and I'm not an Excel MVP, but XLOOKUP, if you're doing VLOOKUPs, you definitely need to move to XLOOKUPs, and data types. Data types is really treating the data as like a PowerShell object, and I'll show you this. Okay. So some of these scenarios, so I used to get exports of users' data. So hey, from call manager, dump your user list and your phone numbers, and I have to massage the data. Or get me a dump of your user licensing, and I'll make sure that your users are licensed that when we plan the ports. But then there's always something, oh, like this data is bad, we need to, to massage it, or hey, these users are gonna get licensed, or these users are disabled, and I keep getting copies of CSV files. So I've gone a way of manipulating the original file from the customer, because I'll spend all this time creating PowerShell and working with this data, and then only to get another copy. Definitely recommend putting your Excel workbooks in SharePoint or OneDrive so you can do versioning and share that out. But what I now do is I suck the data in through the data tab, and I create data connection to the CSV. So I have from text CSV, I reference the customer's exports instead of work with the customer's exports directly. And the reason for this is we have the ability to use Power Query. And so if I open this, and this is my machine that hasn't been powered off in a while, or powered on in a while, so there is a version issue. But when I look at this in Power Query, which is on the other screen, I now can massage the data in a way that's repeatable. So I may decide that, hey, these columns are garbage, or maybe I need to convert these columns, format these columns in certain ways, or do, text, split them out because there's, spacing, or connect them, or whatever like that. So I can create my rules, and then every time I get a new CSV, I just refresh the rules against that. So that could be, hey, we have our source data, so I'm just referencing a location. I'm going to promote the first row as columns. I can create my own columns. And then I'm just changing them all to text, but I can change them into any kind of Excel format. Now I'm interacting with that data indirectly so that I can, hey, I create a pivot table for licensing just to see who's enterprise voice enabled. And if those users aren't in enterprise voice enabled, I'm going to tell the customer, hey, go enable them, give me an export saying that they're done. I'll go and plan the ports. And so I can then hit refresh, suck in that new data, and I can get all my updated reports. Where this gets interesting is when you connect it with data types. So data types, and if we take a look at this, we'll go here. So again, same scenario, customer does an export of users. This project is ongoing, more users, maybe as a pilot users, and you're enabling, maybe you're starting to do Active Directory sync, and you're starting to pull more objects in. Again, use that data type, connect in. I'll show this example. So I'm sucking in the CSV, which is again an export from the customer. I'm going to promote the columns same way as before. I'm going to change them all to text columns. But this time I'm going to use this data type text at the top here. And so this is only available in the online version of Excel, like the Microsoft Apps version of Excel, not the MSI. And this allows you to do some interesting things. I just removed a couple columns. And so when my data changes, and if we hit refresh, you can see that gets all sucked in, so it's dynamic. We'll just undo that for now. But now I get to interact with my data in Excel as if I was interacting with it in PowerShell. So if we go in an example, we're going to just say online, let's see, just grab a couple policies here. Online voice routing policy. Let's grab line URI. Let's grab enterprise voice enabled. And then let's go and refresh that data. So now we can start interacting with our data and treating this similar to what we were doing in PowerShell without actually touching any PowerShell. So I'm just going to do these. So now if we go in, we can create some interesting reports. Again, I said we're interacting with this like as if we were doing it with PowerShell. So I'll just take a different example. I'm going to say equals C9, which is that drop-down field. And I'm going to say, you know what, online voice routing policy. Oh. And then I'm going to say equals C9.line URI. And so now I'm going to go pick a user, let's say Megan, and you can start to see we're interacting with this data. So now I can create reports that's like maybe comparing two users against each other and comparing their values. Let's see why one user is working, one user is not. Until we get the routing tool where we can do those tests within the admin center. This is a way just to compare some objects, build some reports, and interact with the data. Again, we refresh that source data. All of a sudden, we have a whole bunch more results. But the true power, and what I, kind of without those advanced features, is using simple Excel formulas. Something as, hey, we're going to do an XLOOKUP. An XLOOKUP is basically saying, I'm going to take this cell, look at a column, and then return another column. So I can say, hey, look at this display name, because that's all I got from the customer. I'm going to go match it to the display name on Azure AD and grab the phone number. Or maybe I have Cisco Export and it just has display name and phone number. And I can just say, okay, I'm going to look for this display name and grab that phone number. So a lot of power you can do there. And then when you add that with concatenate, you can just generate your PowerShell commands. So I can enable thousands of users by just generating simple PowerShell. And my big tip here is always put a write output in the front of it. Use a semicolon to do 2 commands on one line. But then you can copy these rows, paste it in IC, hit run. You'll get your little output. It'll chug along, and you can enable thousands of users without having to do any complex scripting. Of course, if you're doing calling plans, you may want to decide that, hey, these addresses, these emergency addresses, are tied to these conference bridge numbers. And then you say, hey, we have this user number inventory, and then we can grab a user and say, okay, based on this user that's assigned to this location, let's set their conference bridge number, let's set their location ID, let's set their calling plan number, or their operator connect number. All this using simple PowerShell. So some tips that, just kind of going, using GitHub and kind of as through experience. Great script that's out there. I have the link, but I think the slides are going to be available after the sessions. But this script is a great one that dumps all the licensing. So this is the input for my first pivot table I was showing. It actually has input files where you can override create your own friendly names. So if you don't like the Microsoft kind of SKU names and service names, you can override those so they're a little bit more friendly. So great script. Dealing with numbers for calling plans and now operator and connect. There is some nuances of these commandlets. So we talked about the new set and remove number management commandlet that's coming. But today we're going to use CS Online voice user, CS Online dial-in conferencing user, and CS Online telephone number. These commandlets have default result sets. So if you're dealing with over 100, you're going to want to specify the dash first and put a large number for the online voice user. That online voice user does hide the emergency information, so you do have to put another commandlet for expanding that. If you're dealing with the other 2 commandlets, you can put a result size and then put a larger number on that. If you are specifying a specific number and then you go beyond that, keep that in mind. I had a customer that we were doing calling plans, a large deployment, and we were just testing and we had a 6,000 value just to play with the results, and we went far past that, and we were like, where's all our numbers? What's going on here? So make sure you're matching your result size with the actual data, and that's something, again, you have to understand how that commandlet is written. A great command that came across when I was doing a calling plan project, so it was all net new numbers, thousands of numbers across many rate centers. Trying to grab those from the admin center was a little hard, just because you had to create the emergency addresses first. You have to go through a lot of UI. So what we did was we found this PowerShell script, just looking at the get number inventory commandlet in GitHub, we found this script. And this script is, and I'll show you here, it's an impressive use of outgrid view. Let's see if this works. And it's actually using outgrid view to pull a bunch of results, and then you can select that value and pipe it into the next outgrid view. So if we look at this one, say we're going to go to, let's just go California. So I picked California. It's actually going to pipe into the next call, and we're going to say, hey, we want San Diego. It's going to pipe into the next. Now I'm going to see all the area codes, and now it's going to ask me for a quantity of numbers. I can say, hey, I want 1,000 numbers, or 999, which is kind of the limit you can call. And then it's going to say, oh, there's not that much inventory, but we'll grab you the 500 or so numbers that you want. The great thing with this is you can easily pillage rate centers to get the numbers you need for your project. probably a little bit quicker than, well, at least it was in the old days where you had to send an email to request numbers and wait for inventory. So from that, we actually created a monitoring script to watch the inventory as it was being replenished. And then we would send alerts to the customer to grab those additional numbers as they were looking for all these net new numbers. So that's how we were kind of taking a bunch of numbers across rate centers for this enterprise customer that was getting all net new calling plan numbers during the pandemic. Let's see what time, doing good, okay. Cloud Shell. So Cloud Shell is actually pretty powerful when you think of the scenario that we're doing one-liners and not complex PowerShell scripts anymore. There is a limit in PowerShell or Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell will only run for 20 minutes inactive. So if you're running a long script that's like looping through a bunch of users, tens of thousands of users, doing enable, eventually it's going to time out and you're going to be lost in your script. The great thing is if you're copying thousands of rows and you paste it in there, those are each in their own command. So you're not hitting the inactive timer. And the reason why I love Cloud Shell is when I go into a customer and they may have lockdown permissions on their machine, maybe they're fighting TLS, some of the nuances of, let's see here, I have those. So, maybe, some of the little quick fixes for customers is like, oh, we can't connect, can't install the Teams PowerShell module. Well, maybe they're blocking TLS, so we have a one-liner to force the TLS mode. Or maybe they have a group policy that is blocking basic authentication for WinRM. This is probably the most common one I run into. If you're an administrator of your machine, you can override that registry key until the next group policy refresh. So it's not a permanent solution, but you can maybe do some work. But if you're doing Cloud Shell, you get by that. So we can use Cloud Shell and have that container working within the Teams admin center. What Cloud Shell is basically a container image of PowerShell that's attached to the admin centers, and this is attached to the Azure portal, as well as the Microsoft 365 portal, and it's already on the roadmap to go into the Teams portal. So, highly recommend this. You don't have to install modules on your machine. You can, put scripts in, cloud storage and pull from that if you want. But pretty powerful stuff. Includes all the modules that you need right out of the gate. So, an example of that. Let's see. If this is one of the ones I had to record this morning. So this is just kind of talking about those commandlets. So if we go to Cloud Shell, so all you do is you click the icon on your M365 admin center. If you don't have it already, it's going to ask you to connect to your Azure services. It does require a subscription, but it's only for file storage, and it's like a 6 gig image. So I think it costs, I'm Canadian, it costs like $4 a year. So pretty low cost on this. And this image is basically has all your modules. Now, if you run Connect-Microsoft Teams in it today, it will fail. But there's a parameter for this. If you do Connect-Microsoft Teams -use device authentication, you'll get a code and a web link. Copy the code before you leave. So copy that code, get it in your clipboard, click the link because the link is clickable. Put that code in, and it's going to authenticate. So now if you think about your conditional access, it's the same. It is running through the US, at least when I was running it from Canada. It didn't matter where my data storage was, so you have to think about your conditional access from that point of view. But wherever my browser is that I can authenticate to administrative actions, I can now use PowerShell in that same place. So now you can do Connect-Microsoft Teams, use device authentication, do your calls to, to your online voice users. There is a nuance here, and once it gets its results back, connect Azure AD. So there is an issue that, and this is the power of editing. This takes about 3 minutes to get result back. So connect Azure AD, looks like it worked. We're going to go and get a user. Again, another 3 minutes later, and we're going to get a malformed token. This happens only when you connect to Azure AD from within the Microsoft 365 admin center. I've already posted this bug, it hasn't been actioned, but if you launch Cloud Shell from the Azure portal and do the same thing, everything is good. So what you have to do is go to your Azure portal, restart the image. So there's a little power button, you can hit Restart Cloud Shell. takes a little bit longer than that to restart the Cloud Shell. But now if I do a connect Azure AD, within a split second, it is connected. I can do my Azure AD command. I can then go back to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and interact with Azure AD. So as long as you first authenticate to Azure AD using Cloud Shell in the admin portal for Azure, then you can use it in the Microsoft one. So that's just a nuance I came across, but pretty powerful stuff, and they're always adding the newest modules into that. So this is just kind of some bonus items just for me personally as a consultant. Sorry, and these are not Microsoft things, but I've been doing a lot of direct routing with Cisco Call Manager and Cisco Cubes, and of course you work with their teams and they love the console, and you're trying to debug SIP traces in the console. There is a tool that they have that they may not be aware of, but this Translator X, it's been spun off of the kind of Cisco main pages. But you can copy the debug logs from Call Manager or from a cube, paste it in here. It'll give you your full ladder diagram. You'll be able to kind of see that ladder diagram, go into the SIP messages. Great tool. If you're working with Cisco, definitely take a look at this. The other thing that has been a lifesaver with all the accounts I have is tryshifts.com. And so this actually containerizes Teams using the Chromium version of Teams into different instances. So I can have signed into guest access, I can be signed into other accounts, all in navigating within that additional little rail on this side. Of course, other apps as well. But this, I was coming to a point where I had so many Edge browser profiles open that when something was ringing, I'd be clicking everywhere trying to find it. This, at least I can just go down a straight line if I don't know which one is ringing. So lifesaver for the consultant. Totally not supported by Microsoft in any way. Just want to throw that out. Yeah, I highly recommend. Another one, I haven't personally used this, but Calendar Bridge, one of my colleagues on the O365A team, uses this to sync all his different consulting calendars into one place, shares that out and manipulates it. I do something similar because early in the pandemic I had the same problem. I create a whole bunch of Power Automates that like connect to all the different customers and then pull into a scheduling calendar, and I kind of do my availability off of that. Had I known that this was available, I would have used this, but I've invested too much time in my Power Automate. But the thing with dealing with Power Automate is that if you look at a reoccurring meeting, even if you kind of peek at it, you create like 1,000 calls to the API, so you'll hit a lot of throttling issues when you're doing this. So check it out, and that's what I have. Again, thank you for our sponsors. Check out their swag and their different products, and always fill out evaluations. I know there's a lot of content, a lot of demos, but thank you, everyone.